As a police officer for so many years, 30 years, I saw and dealt with a lot of things that shocked me and took time for me to come to terms with. And this case, this shocking story, will fill you with as much dread as it did with me. The senseless and brutal killings do not make any sense, and you will understand towards the end just how disturbing this tragic tale really is. It really is a shocker. The Hinterkaifeck farm was well known to locals and it had been built in 1863, but it became more well known since then as the murders that occurred on the evening of the 31st of March 1922, when 6 inhabitants of a small Bavarian farmstead located approximately 43 miles north of Munich, Germany, were brutally murdered by an unknown assailant or assailants. The 6 victims were Andreas Gruber, aged 63, his wife Cecilia Gruber, aged 72, their widowed daughter Victoria Gabriel, aged 35, Victoria's children Cecilia, aged 7, and Josef, aged 2, and then the maid Maria Bamgurt, aged 44. They were all found struck dead with a mattock, a hand tool used for chopping and digging. It's very similar to a pickaxe. The murderer or murderers then lived in the same farmhouse as the 6 corpses of their victims for 3 days. Throughout this period, they would eat the food in the house, feed the animals on the property, and start fires in the home's fireplace. Some 6 months prior to the attack, the former family maid had quit, and it was widely believed that the reason was because she had heard strange sounds in the attic and believed the house to be haunted. She left for this very reason. What she had heard and how disturbed she was forced her to quit her job as a maid. Additionally, and just days before the murders, Andreas Gruber told neighbours that he had discovered tracks, footprints in the fresh snow that led from the forest to a broken door lock in the farm's machine room towards the back of the house. The footprints in the snow led to their farm, but no footprints were seen going back out of the farm. This was a one-way ticket and nothing more. Gruber then mentioned that later during the night, the family had heard footsteps in the attic, but Gruber found no one when he searched the building. Now, despite telling several people about these strange occurrences and his observations, he still refused offers of help from friends, and all such details went unreported to the police and were just put down to being exactly that, strange occurrences, and that was it. According to a school friend of one of the murder victims, 7-year-old Cecilia Gabriel, the young girl, they reported that the mother, Victoria, had fled the farm the night before the act after a violent quarrel, and only hours later had been found in the forest again. This information was not investigated any further. On Friday the 31st of March 1922, during the afternoon, the new maid Maria Baumgart arrived at the farm and was dropped off by her sister, who had then left her there after staying a short while. She was most likely the last person to see the inhabitants alive, as they were later brutally murdered. The investigation into the murders showed that at some stage in the late evening, Victoria Gabriel, her 7-year-old daughter Cecilia, and her parents, Andreas and Cecilia, were then lured to the family barn through the stables, where they were then each murdered, one by one. It was believed that the victims were probably drawn to the barn and the stables from noises from the animals, with the murderer or murderers orchestrating these noises to lure the family members one by one. Now, the assailant or assailants used a mattock belonging to the family farm and killed the family with several blows to the head each, and leaving them with no chance at all as they met their tragic demise. The bodies in the barn had all then been stacked up on top of one another. The killer or killers then moved into the living room quarters, where they used the very same murder weapon and killed Josef, who was only aged 2 years old, who was sleeping in his baby basket, and then they murdered Baumgart, the maid, in her bedroom. It was a whole 4 days passing between the murders and the discovery of the bodies and the grisly scene. So on the 1st of April 1922, 2 regular coffee sellers arrived in Hinterkaifeck to take an order from the family, and when no one responded to the knocks on the door and the window, they walked around the yard but still found no one. There was nobody around. It was then that they noticed that the gate to the machine house was open, but despite this, they decided to still leave. However, it was around 3:30 p.m. when Lorenz Schlittenbauer sent his son and stepson to Hinterkaifeck to see if they could make contact with the family, and again they had no joy. This was then reported to the police, and Schlittenbauer decided to head to the farm the same day with some friends to see if they could find out where the family were. It was then, and upon entering the barn, they found the bodies of Andreas Gruber, his wife Cecilia, his daughter Victoria, and the granddaughter Cecilia. Shortly afterwards, they found the maid Maria Baumgart and the youngest family member, Josef, murdered in the farmhouse. Initial investigations into the murders were hampered by the number of people who had interacted with the crime scene, moved the bodies and other items around, and even bizarrely cooked and had eaten meals in the family kitchen. I mean, it was a crime scene. What the hell was that all about? During the investigation, there was evidence that the perpetrators were staying in the house or the farm before the killings. This one is disturbing and very creepy, as your house is supposed to be a safe haven and the place where you are meant to feel secure, and not a place where you have to comprehend that there is the possibility that your killer or killers may be living with you without you even noticing their presence. This is beyond unsettling, and one, in this case, that had catastrophic consequences. The day after the discovery of the bodies, a court physician performed autopsies in the barn, and it was established that the murder weapon had been a mattock, a pickaxe, although the murder weapon was never found at the scene. Evidence later showed that 7-year-old Cecilia had been alive for several hours after the attack, and she had torn her hair out in tufts in anguish while she lay in the straw in the barn. The skulls of all of the victims were then removed and sent to Munich for further examination. During the investigation, it was first suspected to be a robbery, and police investigators interrogated several inhabitants from the surrounding villages, tradesmen and local vagrants, and they left no stone unturned. But then the idea of it being a robbery was later abandoned as a plausible theory when a large amount of money was still found in the house, and instead they were shocked to learn that throughout this period the murderer or murderers would eat the food in the house, feed the animals on the property, and even start fires in the home's fireplace. On the 1st of April at 3 a.m, some hours after the murders, a local butcher was on his way home near where the murders happened when he observed two mysterious figures at the edge of the forest. When the strangers saw him, they turned around so that their faces could not be seen. Later, when he heard of the murders in Hinterkaifeck, he thought it possible that the strangers might be involved. Now, with no clear motive to ascertain from the crime scene and the murders, the police began to formulate a list of likely suspects. And then over the years, and despite repeated arrests of suspects and an intensive investigation, no murderer or murderers have ever been found, and the files were subsequently closed in 1955. The final interrogations took place in 1986 on this cold case slaying, and this was before Detective Chief Superintendent Konrad Muller retired, and the case remains, as is today, unsolved. Less than a year after the murders and the murder investigation, the farm was completely demolished. This was a barbaric incident of bloodshed and total devastation for the Hinterkaifeck family, and one that remains as puzzling and disturbing to this day as it did back then when it occurred. Someone brutally murdered a family in cold blood, and seemingly with no remorse, in what will always be an incident of absolute tragedy for all involved. God rest their souls.